All right. So today we're talking economics. Yay! Economics is going to be something we hit on quite a bit. There's some principles we have to get in order for us to understand why the changing attitudes matter. You'll find, if you're any kind of student of economics at all, that most people do not understand economics really very well. People tend to have a really elementary look, their attitude of what it is, how things function, what have you, even today. And so it's one of the things I want to do is spend some time going over some of the basics with you guys. By no means this is nothing compared to like actually taking an economics class, but I think you'll find that if you actually spend the time looking into it, it's quite rewarding. I mean, think about it. You guys are all participants in economy. You have your own economy, your own personal finances. And that's one thing that people commonly say when they first move out and have their own places is that, man, I wish someone actually talked to me about like how to balance a checkbook or how to budget and do all these sorts of things. So this is just kind of one of those ways we're going to lead into it. But for starters, you have to understand a pretty basic concept of economics. That is the terms supply and demand. Because pretty much everything with the economy can be broken down into supply and demand. All right. Does anybody know what these words mean? Anyone have a guess? All right, go ahead.
Okay, supply, I think, means supply the person good stuff, and then not like that, like food or something like that. And then demand, like you demand the person wants. I don't know, that's that totally came out from something.
Fair enough. So let's take it. All right. Supply is how much of something there is. How much supply there is of it. Is there a lot of something, or is it rare? Because that will determine a couple things about it. Generally, people are more willing to spend more money on something that there is very little of, and are willing to pay less money for something that there's a lot of. Now, this is a general simplification of the idea, but if combined with demand, how much people want something determines how expensive something is. So you see out of that graph where there's supply and demand, and in the middle is price. The way this works is if there is a steady demand for something, people want something, and there's less of it, it becomes more expensive. So examples of that. Have you guys ever been to like a concert or a sports game? Like, things. You ever see guys up front selling tickets? All right, how much do they charge for those tickets? Are they the same amount as what the box office sells, or are they more? Why are they able to sell them for more?
There's more right now.
Partially, yes, you're right. But the other thing has to do with, all right, you don't have a ticket, they're sold out of tickets, so you're not going to get a ticket unless you buy from me or one of these other folks selling tickets. So that's one of the ways they can do that. Another good example of that is diamonds. Think about what a diamond is. It's a rock. It's a pretty rock. It's a rock. It's really no different than any other pretty rock. So people are willing to pay a lot of money for them because they are rare. Although, interestingly enough, they're actually not rare. If you actually look into the diamond markets, there's tons of them. But one company has bought off, basically they control all the diamonds. They're pretty much the only ones who can mine them, and they buy up all the diamonds so that they can charge whatever they want, essentially. Ah, I thought you said it was 4. All right, which test did you take? Test or quiz? talking about. No. All right, thank you. Last name? Yeah, I need to actually set up for that. Yeah, I was waiting for you during fourth. I was like, why isn't she showing up? And because it's fifth. You're going to take it at the desk. Why do I have a random blank test in here? Oh, don't tell me. All right, just ignore questions 1 through 15. The adjustment I have is no longer anywhere of any consequence. Seriously, I kept the one that doesn't have what I need on it. Alright, that's it. So, that's supply and demand. Those are some basic concepts. Generally speaking, demand can increase or decrease based upon what is driving a society. You know, for instance, back to diamonds question, why do people like diamonds? What do diamonds mean in our society? Yeah. Unanimously, like the vast majority of diamonds in this country go into the wedding industry. And yet that has only been the thing for the past maybe 60, 70 years. Before that, people didn't buy diamonds. In fact, engagement rings didn't exist. Not really. Or rather, wedding rings didn't exist. The wedding ring was the engagement ring, which is one ring. But De Beers, the company I was talking about, started a marketing campaign where they sold to people, if your guy really loves you, he'll buy you a diamond. And so this became a part of our culture, and now it's just what you do. That's some awesome marketing on their job. They increase demand for a rock. It's mind-boggling, yeah.
Aren't diamonds like the most expensive one, or is there like?
No.
Isn't it like not as expensive anymore or something?
No, it depends. It varies. They're still very pricey. But you're right. They aren't the most expensive of all gemstones. It also depends on a couple factors, such as the 5 C's, like clarity, color, and things like that. But the other thing is we can also create diamonds, lab-created gemstones, which is ironic because those are less expensive, even though they are better quality. Like if you look at a lab-created gemstone, they are perfect. They're perfectly clear. They have perfect color. We can tailor it to whatever we want, but that's not as good because it's not natural. How stupid is that? Mentally, when you break it down, it's like, that's dumb, but we all feel that way because of tradition. That's the whole thing. So anywho, the economy is going to change dramatically during this era because of a few things. Now, first off, we have a new period of the transaction of goods, ideas, people, even diseases caused by Christopher Columbus, known as the Columbian Exchange. Because of his quote-unquote discovery of the New World, basically you're going to have this moving back and forth that is going to result in quite a few changes in culture, in the invention of some cultures. But another major change it has is the movement of peoples, the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, in fact. Now, the reason for it in the first place is because when the Spanish started settling some of these areas, they found areas that didn't sell gold. But it did grow sugarcane really well, and that, as you know, was incredibly lucrative. So they enslaved the natives, which Columbus actually suggested to have done to the Taino, and this began the fourth period of work that was known as the encomiendas system, and also began this hunger in the New World for labor, slave labor. But when the natives started dying out en masse, this idea was we need to replace the labor, we need it cheap labor. And so slaves were brought from Africa to replace them. Now, why Africa? Well, latitudinally, it is on the same degrees as the Caribbean. Of course, it's not the same really at all. I mean, temperature-wise, it's very, very different. But I thought, hey, it's close enough. Second of all, there was already an elaborate system of slavery in Africa. One thing that I think we have this vision of is that these white slavers were going in and capturing Africans and bringing them out. Fact is the Europeans never did that. It was too far into the interior. Africans sold other Africans into slavery. But again, that in of itself is a misnomer because they didn't see themselves as Africans. They saw themselves based on trade. And the slave system worked kind of like this. Whenever you were fighting a war, in battle, you could take and capture fallen soldiers as slaves. It was also possible to enslave their families and to make raids on other towns and villages to capture slaves. Now, once you had a slave, you could do whatever you wanted because they were property. They weren't human anymore. So what happened was the Europeans exacerbated this cycle. They made it worse because they introduced guns into the cycle. Because tribal warfare wasn't really about being like killing, basically. It was about psychological warfare. So the wars were fairly tame. Like, they could be pretty bloody, but as a general rule, they weren't near as bloody as what we saw in Europe. That wasn't worth the risk. You know, these were tribes. They were groups of families. They didn't want to see lots of their members die because it would put hardships on their family. So it tended to be less about actual bloodshed and more about psychological warfare. Guns changed that because when you introduce guns into the cycle, now we can make a much more deadly force and capture much more land and capture many more slaves, which then will trade back to the Europeans for more guns, because the Europeans only took slaves for guns. That's the only thing they would allow in trade in exchange for their guns. So this meant that the slaves would be traded for guns, and that would cause the tribe that took them to get more guns so they could get more slaves, to get more guns and more slaves, and the cycle continues. So the situation got really bad. So the Europeans, while they didn't start the system, they definitely made it worse. Secondly, there was a lot of complacency by African leaders. You know, it was a very unpopular sentiment to try to put an end to the slave trade, despite the disaster that it was causing, because it could enrich people. Someone could become very wealthy through the selling of slaves. So what happened was, these countries, in a lot of cases, would try to overthrow slavery in their country and then fail from within. Now, one group that did do it was the country Fututoro, which was an Almond. The Almond of Fututoro banned slavery and indeed the slave trade in general in his country. So what happens, the Europeans tried to plead with him and bribe him, and his generals and leaders tried to do the same thing, and he would have nothing to do with it, and eventually they just started going around Fututoro. So it worked temporarily, but eventually put an end to it, or rather didn't put an end to it. So this exacerbated the situation. Finally, another major problem was the fact that the types of slaves being captured, you know, these were business transactions. So they were selling a product. And so they looked for the best product they could find. Think about if you were a slave trader. What traits would you want in a slave? Would you want them old or young? Young. Would you want them healthy or sick? Would you want them smart or dumb? Smart. Would you want them strong or weak? So we're taking the strongest, smartest, healthiest, youngest people from a country, and we're going to do that for the next 300 years. The economic impacts in Africa have not yet been overcome. it's still affecting them to this day.
Well, wasn't they like kind of sort of dumb ones because like when they like rebel or something?
And they did rebel. That absolutely did happen. But no, the reason is you want smart slaves so they can do more complicated tasks. You use other means to control slaves. If you've never seen Roots, you should see it. It's pretty brutal, but it's really, really well done. It's an older program, but it's very good. Yeah. LeVar Burton for the win. Anywho, but another really good one is on the stock, which shows a slave rebellion once it's been made illegal. Because eventually the slave trade was illegalized in the United States, and people did it anyways. They basically would run them illegally. And this one particular group of slaves rebelled, captured the ship, and as they were trying to figure out how to sail back home, they ended up being captured by the U.S. Navy. And so a court case erupts in the Supreme Court as to what to do. The slaves are claiming, we're from Africa, which makes them illegal. The company that had owned the slaving ship said, no, they're from the Americas, they're from the Carolinas, they're totally legal. And the naval officers who captured said, hey, these guys were found out in the open ocean, this is booty, we get to keep them for ourselves. Yes, laugh, it's hilarious. No, it means a different thing. You know, it's sort of like swag. When people say swag, I mean, you talk about pirate stolen goods. That's what it is. That's what it means. The word means. It's not being swagger. That doesn't. You right back there? Hashtag swag. Anyways, this shows the Columbian Exchange. You can look at it later. But this references the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage refers to the third point in the triangle, really the middle part of the triangle. Because basically, the slaves were brought from Africa in exchange for guns. The guns were brought from Europe, and then the European guns were bought with the profits from the New World, which they were bringing raw materials. So it was raw materials for manufactured goods like guns, guns for slaves, slaves for the same thing, and you continue doing that forever, making money as you go. But these people were treated as cargo. They were packed in as tightly as possible, because the more slaves you brought, the more profit you could make. If they died en route, that happens. They saw that as little disturbing as if you've ever gotten a package from UPS, it's like been smashed or stepped on or something, I need a new one. They send you a new one. That's how they view people. Whenever you view people as objects, their needs, their wants, their desires become irrelevant. They were let up once, 1 hour per day to exercise and do their business. If you had to use the restroom any other time during the day, you just went. And here's the thing is, this is a famous picture, rather infamous, showing the thing, but I've never thought this was good enough. Because you'll notice it says right here, plan showing the storage of 130 additional slaves around the wings or sides forward deck by means of platforms. Or to put it in other words, this is what it was like. Hope you're not claustrophobic for 3 months. Yep.
So they can't like move for like 3 months?
Yep.
Why can't they move?
Well, you can. It's not like you're being held completely immobile, but you're only able to move insofar as your chains and the decking allows you.
Oh, the chain though.
Yeah, you can see it right here. It's kind of a crack.
They feed them?
Yep. Once a day.
How do they go to the bathroom? On themselves?
Yeah, I know, right? Yes,
Oh my
ma'am.
gosh, they get I want to be the top person for this one. Wait, how's that going? Wait, so like they couldn't like necessarily pull up the pants and like store the corner.
Possibly, if they shuffle around.
Stuff.
Yeah, but that would happen a lot too. Sometimes people died of disease, you'd be chained to a corpse for 24 hours.
Oh, why would you like
I think the average weight loss on one of these trips is something like 30 to 50 pounds. Yeah. This is what happens when we stop treating people as people. And by the way, we're really bad at that. It's a human condition thing. We do it all the time, although not to this extreme. we don't think about other people being human beings. Like when you start to think about that, it becomes really, really kind of odd. Like people road rage all the time, right? That idiot cut me off, yada yada, things like that. Here's the thing: that person was a person doing something that was probably logical at the time. Everyone will be a dumb driver at least once. At least once. It sometimes happens more often than that. Sometimes you'll find yourself cutting somebody off because you didn't realize it. That's why one of those common things I've seen people say about like honking horns, I wish I had "I'm sorry, I was an idiot" button on their car. So that like sign would flash up like, "I know I was in the wrong, I'm terribly sorry, please don't hate me." Because we've all been there. We all will be there. It's how it goes. But we don't think about that because of the inconvenience it places on us, and we become road rage. See what I'm saying? It's really easy to do that. It's something we do all the time because it's part of our psyche. But we should take time more frequently to think about people as people. Because otherwise, on the extreme, this is what happens. So to put into perspective, when these folks got there, they would then be fattened up. They would be exercised to try to make them better show, or they would be on a fast sale, at which case, again, it was the pick of the litter, that sort of thing. Not to say that they had a rosy experience being slaves back in the New World, but it was considerably worse in the Middle Passage. I forget the percentage that died, too, but it was startlingly high. A significant number of people who were captured from their homes never made it even to their new destination. So, new economic forms. One of the things that is a common misconception regarding economics is that it is a competition. Now, competition is an important concept in economics, but that actually is beneficial. Whenever you have two companies competing with each other, that means that the customer is going to get a better product at a better price. Because think about it, why do we buy the products we do? Actually, one of the number one things is branding. We will pay a lot more for a name brand object whenever it is no better. Because of a fallacy of logic. It is name brand, therefore it is better quality. Or it is more expensive, therefore it is better quality. It's not necessarily the truth. Another problem with the idea of competition is basically the idea that there's a finite amount of money in the world. And for one person to have lots of money, another person has to have less money. Okay? Logically, that makes sense, right? I mean, is there a finite amount of dollar bills in the world? Is there only so many dollar bills in the world? Yes? Yes, that's absolutely true. There's only so much money that exists in currency, yet most people don't deal with currency. I think the longest stretch I went without having a dollar bill in my wallet was about 5 years. I never had to use cash. I always used a credit card, or actually a debit card. I don't even have a credit card. But I used little numbers in a bank. And as I showed you yesterday with the bank trick, banks can create money that way. So it is infinite. And in fact, using cash as a means of discussing the power of an economy like mercantilism does is a fallacy. It is not really a good way. For instance, we don't have a lot of cash in the United States. We're hugely in debt. But we do have other assets. Yes, ma'am.
What's the point in having a credit card if you're always in debt and have one?
Well, the idea of a credit card, hopefully, is that you don't go into debt with it. Is that you borrow money and then you pay it off immediately as soon as the bill comes in full. Most people don't do that, though. They don't have the discipline to do it. My dad has actually mastered using credit cards to pay for his travel expenses. Like, he's taken about 5 cruises in the past couple of years. He hasn't paid for any of them. Like, well, he's paid for the cruise tickets, but like the airfare, the hotels, he hasn't paid for any of that because he has one of those traveler credit cards. And the thing is, they give you like triple the money on it if you buy like tickets with it. So what he does is he buys all the tickets, everything on a credit card, pays it off with his money, and then all those points accumulate, and he buys everything else with that. So it's like, I don't know, there's ways of mastering it that way and getting the benefit out of it. The other thing is sometimes you just need, what it is a loan. You need a loan with short-term notice. For instance, you're driving a car on a road trip and your engine goes out. You have to pay for it right now. You might not have access to your accounts or currency or things like that, so you use a credit card and pay it off. But it's that last step of paying it off that we're not very good at in this country. So that's fine. Personally, I don't like credit cards, but yeah, that's just me. Yeah.
You make money. I know it's like another question.
Who actually produces
Like
it?
in my mind, I think that like it's in like the factory and like making money.
It is. It's called a mint. There's three
Could
of
they
them.
steal it though? Like,
No.
couldn't the president, if he wanted somebody like, does he run that?
No.
Oh, I thought he did. So like, could he just be like, give me $20?
No.
Make it?
No. Now, there's a couple reasons why that would work. For one thing, there's a system of checks and balances in our government. The president has actually very little power. It's funny, actually. His power is directed to very specific things. Where you say an abuse of his presidential power, like the president's not allowed to do that, that's what I'm talking about. Is whenever it's questionable, like, can you really do it? A great example of that is when he says, Army, we need to go to Syria. We haven't declared war in Syria, so you can't do that. But he does do it because it's a police action. It's not really a war. It's skirting the line. People will argue whether that's an abuse of power or not. But you can't just go to bank printing billions of dollars. The other thing is you wouldn't want to do that. Don't call me. I don't know. It was like 317. Anyways, but the other thing to that is a fact that the more you print money or supply and demand, if we increase that supply, its value goes out. So you actually are shooting the economy in the foot by doing that. So that's why we can't just print money and pay off the national debt, because we actually shoot us in the foot. Not to mention, one of the fallacies of logic in terms of a country is debt is bad. Not all debt is bad if it's an investment. Yeah.
How are we going to debt with just paper that they're making? Like, could we make as much as it we want?
We could, but here's the thing: is what does money represent? Money represents a concept. It's a hard question to answer because most of us say things will represent gold. Actually, used to represent a certain amount of gold back in vaults, but it doesn't do that anymore. We went off the gold standard 100 years ago. But what it does represent is value, a value we all agree on. For instance, why can I take a piece of paper and go exchange it for a coat? Because someone says that has value. We'll finish it up early tomorrow. Guys, please come.